let's go ahead and get into Mark 1:40 through 45. And this verse section right here, this, in my Bible at least, is titled, Jesus Heals a Man with Leprosy. So let's go ahead and get into this. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Let's take a pause real quick. I was super confused at one of the words used here, at least in my translation, and that was the word indignant. See, whenever I looked at that word, or what I thought previously I knew that word as, I thought indignant meant like someone treaded on your dignity. Like, I don't know, I just kind of put words together in my head, and that's what made sense to me. But I was thinking about that, and I'm like, I don't think Jesus would be upset that someone approached him. So I go into it, and I start reading the origin of this word. And I get to the Greek of it, as all Bible scholars do. And indignant, or the root word of this, means to be moved to one's core. Hence, to be moved with compassion or have compassion. To be moved to the very center of your being, of who you are. And I think that gave me a little bit more context for what Jesus was feeling in this situation. That he was moved as a leper reached out to him. All right, let's finish this up. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. So after finishing that verse, once again, we may be saying, that's great and all. Jesus was moved deeply, and that man was healed on the spot. But that was the Bible. If that didn't happen there, where would it happen? And so maybe you're thinking to yourself, has the healing stopped? Did it happen for a short while so people could believe, but now are we left to believe without healing? I am convinced that healing has not stopped. And I have my own personal stories of encounters with God's healing. So whenever I say that, I don't just say it from a belief or from stories of others. I believe from my own view and my own seeing of it happen. So I want to tell you a story of one guy. I don't know if anyone in this place knows him anymore, but during a time when I was a student, we had 3 Trents here at one time. We had, I don't remember the last one's last name, so let's just leave that out. So we had the youth pastor, who was Trent, another guy who was named Trent, and another guy who was named Trent. That third guy, we just lovingly nicknamed Big Cat. And so this dude was like, imagine Zac Efron if he crazy worked out and got buff. That was Big Cat. Like, he was ripped. And even to a point, I remember going to youth camp with Big Cat, and they used to have a game. Don't anymore because someone got injured, and that's how all the fun stops. And we were having this game called Amazon Woman, Amazon Warrior, something like that. Anyways, all the guys got into a circle, linked elbows, and laid on your chest. And you had to hold on for dear life because they blew an air horn, and all the women came after you like they were bloodthirsty, wanting to kill you. And your goal is to hold on to your friends and comrades beside you. It felt like you're in like some sort of trenches in a war movie. And these women grab your ankles and they're trying to pull you out, and they're trying to just like tear apart your teamwork. And so I remember I had Big Cat on my right, and he's, like I said, he's buff Zac Efron. And I'm holding on for dear life, and he loses the person on his right, and it's just me, him, and one guy on my left, and I'm like maybe 15 at this point, and he's, big buff dude. I'm like, I'm about to die. These women are about to tear me apart. And he's holding on. So I love Big Cat. He was a big reason why we did phenomenal that year in youth camp. That was just a little bit about Big Cat. But anyways, like I said, big, buff dude, super strong. So you can imagine my own view of whenever I was there at youth one night, and he comes in on crutches one day, and he can't put any weight on one foot. When you see the biggest guy hobbling like he can't do anything, you're like, oh, he got like someone tried to kill this man. Like he got hit by a car and it just hit his foot and that was it. Like you're imagining the worst, especially as a 15-year-old. You're like, oh gosh, what's happening? So, but that aside, my feelings and my terror, something that happened was at the end of that service, I can't remember what was talked about, but I can remember that he was brought up on stage. The youth pastor, who was also named Trent, invited him on stage, and we all prayed over him. And we all put hands on him. We began to just pray that it would just be healed immediately, because he was in tons of sports, and I'm sure that was a huge bummer that he hurt his ankle so terribly. And we start praying over it, and I can remember so vividly that after we were done praying, he put his foot down, and it was completely fine. He began to jump. He began to move around. He was so pumped to have that done and healed. And another thing I can remember is another story of healing, and it's a little more less dramatic maybe. It's a little less of a big showstopper on a stage, but I think it's a healing in and of itself, and that's the story of my own mother with her migraines. See, my mom used to have crazy, debilitating migraines to the point where like she would have to go in her room, she'd have to shut off all light, close the door, and have to put like a rag over her face to block out any amount of light because it was so debilitatingly painful. And I can remember this happening quite frequently when I was younger, when our family was going through a very stressful time, because stress affects headaches and migraines, as you know. And I can remember just like how many times my mom had to go retreat to the room and throw a rag over her face because she just couldn't be out anymore. She just couldn't be doing anything. And the only relief from the pain was the chance that she could possibly fall asleep through the pain. And I remember how kind of painful that was to see as a kid, your mom going through so much pain. And it was years that she struggled with this. Years, not just months. It was such a long amount of time seeing her in such a painful state. And you can imagine the whole way my family was praying. The whole way my family was praying. We wanted to see it gone. We wanted to see it removed. We were like, what do you say? I just wanted it gone. And I can remember my mom telling me, she told me about how it all finally came to a close. Because as a kid, you know, you kind of just like lose track of time at a certain point. And one day she just stopped having them. And so, well, they kind of trickled off. And so she began to tell me what happened. And what she said is one day she once again gathered up the faith, gathered up the courage to come to the front, and she was prayed over by all the elders. And it was only after that point that whenever she went back to a doctor, that they finally found, somehow just after, they finally found the right medicine to make the migraines stop. After all these years, the doctors couldn't find the right medicine. But it was just the time after all the elders gathered around her and they prayed for healing that they finally found it. To me, that is you can't make the mistake and call that a coincidence. To me, that in and of itself is a healing just in another avenue. So never mistake, and never think that there has to be spotlights, lightning, and confetti going everywhere to realize that you have been touched by God's healing hand. In my own life, I can even think back, oh my gosh, thinking back of it, it's all gross, but I was really handling it well at the time. I was putting away a ping pong table, and I was raising the legs, and I can remember dropping it. Like one of like the little thin steel poles, I was picking it up to like kind of unsocket it from its piece, and it came back down right on my thumbnail, and it completely shattered my nail, like right through it. And that makes me queasy. I'm not queasy usually, but like nails and bones cracking and being gone, like, ugh, I don't want any of that. And I can remember, I kind of like just shrugged it off. I was like, that's gross. All right, we got service. And it wasn't crazy painful, but man, like, did that make me uncomfortable? Like, I didn't want to like touch it with anything. I just wanted to imagine I didn't have a thumb for a while. But I come into this service, and I can remember praying. I'm like, God, this is like, ugh. I am extremely squeamish with nails. God, I just pray. I know this is such a small thing, but I pray that you remove this, that you heal me from this. And I went home, and I woke up the next day, and sure enough, I looked down at my nail, and my nail, like, it's never been cracked. Like, I was like, did I imagine that? Did I dream that? Did that really happen? And I think back to it, I'm like, it did happen. But God, for whatever reason, in his sovereignty, in his majesty decided that this one small thing for me was worthy of his healing touch. And I can even think back at the only thing. Do you guys remember a couple weeks ago I was talking about how terribly painful my back and neck were? Like, I was like trying to put socks on, I couldn't. It wasn't until I just brought it up when we had a tech meeting, and I brought it up, and like, oh, let's pray for it. They prayed for it. I had prayed for it a ton on my own, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't until I brought it up in a group of people, and they all prayed over me, that it took. The next day, it was a little better. The next day, it was the worst it had ever been, and the next day, it was gone. I can't tell you that there is a recipe, that there is something that you can put together to meet all the right pieces, and boom, bada bing, you get a healing. I can't tell you that, because none of these stories have anything in common, except for I was healed. So maybe you're thinking, that's some great stories. You got a couple, you're a pastor. You've been around a little bit. As for pastoring, just a little bit, in a couple years. Yeah, actually, never mind. You can take that back. I haven't been around a bit. So maybe you can say, yeah, you get to see the healings because you're in a pastor position. But I want you not to have that kind of faith. I want you not to look at it with that kind of perspective, because there is a God who is seeking to make you whole. So maybe you're thinking now, how do I get healing? So let's go ahead and get back into the verse a little bit, and I want to break down what this leper was doing. And the first thing that I can say that I saw this leprous man do was that he recognized God and his power. The first thing he did. And let me go ahead and just reread that. It just says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees. That immediately, the men at that time were extremely proud. They had a lot of dignity. They walked around proudly, and rarely even they ran. So this man was in such a place, though he was an outcast, though there's crazy amounts of rules to leprosy, I'll tell you about those in a second, he got down on his knees and begged. He recognized that there was something different about Jesus. So let's talk about what those rules of leprosy are real quick. So we can find those rules in Leviticus 13, 45 through 46. And this is the law that they stood by when dealing with people with leprosy. Anyone with such a defiling disease must wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. As long as they have the disease, they remain unclean. They must live alone. They must live outside the camp. So as a leper, you were completely outcasted. And they even dubbed it, to this point, scholars did, they called it the walking death, because you were completely shut off from all of society. And there was no meeting up privately, we can have lunch, if we go to this place in the corner that no one goes to. It wasn't like that. They were legit put out of the camp, thrown out. They were complete outcasts. And yet this man decided that he would he would go around the law. He would break the law, essentially, because he believed that Jesus had the power to make him clean. And that's one phrase that really stuck out to me. You can make me clean. He believed so fervently that Jesus was the Messiah that he broke the law of the unclean. So how do we do that in our own lives? How do we recognize God's power? And what I really do is I think back a little bit, and I only think about this because my, what is it called? Adrenaline. My adrenaline spiked here on stage whenever I did the fallback thing with Brody. Man, that's going to stick in my mind for a while because my adrenaline pumped. But I think back to that. I think back on trusting God, thinking of his faithfulness, thinking of his provisions. We just talked about how Jireh, God, is a provider. And one of my own little short stories of trusting in his provisions is a job scare I had for a little bit. And so, obviously, you adults kind of get, jobs can be scary. They're your security. They're your lifeline. If you don't have a job, you're not making money. If you're not making money, you probably don't have food, and you probably don't have a house, and all the things that follow. So I had a job scare. I'm not going to go into the details of it yet because that's not important right now. But what happened was I was put in a position such as stand on what God had provided me or step into what God is promising me. And that was something I really struggled with. I can remember going back to my house and just like, I'm not a big crier, but I can remember bawling my eyes out because I was in such turmoil. Because you hear that we are supposed to stand on what he has given us. We are supposed to be like, he is our provider. So I'm standing in this covering of provision, feeling secure, feeling taken care of. And then all of a sudden, I feel God calling me, stepping into a new place. One that's not secure. One that doesn't seem provided for necessarily. And I don't know if you've ever been in such a position, but that is terrifying. Maybe sometimes you have the provisions and the promise and you're able to have both while you're stepping into the promise. But I was put into such a situation that I had to step off my provision to go into his promise. And so maybe you can relate to that a little bit. Sometimes there's a promise that you have to step into that doesn't feel secure, but you have to trust and know that God is with you every step of the way. Let's look at the second thing that the leper did, and that was submit to his sovereignty. Let me pick back up on where he said that. So, the sentence that he says, the only sentence that this leper says, and it is powerful, and he says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Key word, if you are willing. Now, for a leper who has had the walking death, to be outcasted, to put the ball in Jesus' court and tell him, I broke the law, I believe you can do it, I'm right here in front of you, I'm on my knees begging, if you're willing, you can heal me. That is such a step of just complete obedience and being willing for whatever answer. Something that he recognized here was that Jesus was a person. He was sovereign, which means that he can make his own decisions. He operates outside of our own limitations and understandings like we talked about at the beginning. He understood that and still approached him and recognized his power and put the ball in his court to do whatever. So now, how do we submit to sovereignty? Well, let's talk about what sovereignty means real quick, because I didn't have a complete fine detail of the definition in my mind. I like definitions if you can't tell. So sovereignty is to have supreme power or authority. And, authority is the ability to make decisions and then be done, So here's some examples of what power and authority may look like in our lives today. I mean, for example, we have the government, that's speed limits, that's don't trespass signs, we have the taxes. Second is maybe you have a boss at work. And with a boss at work, we have hours that we have to uphold. There's job boundaries. There's how long lunch break is, which sometimes we wish it could be longer, but hey, whatever. And third is, let's talk about parents again. Now that some of you are parents or you're still, some of you that are still kids, and there's those of us that are in the gray area that aren't neither yet. So those parents, you got to set bedtimes. You have to uphold curfews. And if your kid says they don't like dinner, well, sometimes they don't get dinner. But whatever. So using these real examples and looking at how we submit to them and how we follow them, it looks like accepting the orders, even if we don't agree with it. It looks like following through completely, not just when we want to do it. And 3, it looks like respecting the person or authority that it comes with, no matter what is said. And lastly, I want to look at what the last step of what this leper did. And he didn't do it, I'm going to be completely fair. He didn't do it right, but he was ready for some next step. Let's talk about that real quick. And it says this, Jesus sent him away with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices Moses commanded you for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly. And then I'll cut it off there. So this guy's next step was to be quiet. It was to do the sacrifices, be quiet, and be pretty much a silent testimony. But this guy wasn't. He was not. As a matter of fact, he talked so much to the point where Jesus wasn't allowed in the town. You have to talk pretty loud to get a guy kicked out of town. So Jesus, let's talk about this. Jesus knew fully what the man would do. We already know that God does what he does, knowing everything that can happen. And so Jesus gave him this order, go out and tell no one, but he still knew that he was going out to tell someone. You can speculate all you want about what's really going on there, but I think what it comes down, you can speculate being like, oh yeah, God was trying to use reverse psychology and all that stuff. I try not to get into the weeds on this, but what we do know is that this man was healed. He was given an order. Despite that order, he still went out and talked. And at the end of the verse, it still said that everyone came out to meet Jesus, even in the lonely places. And that's what I really want to hone in there. I don't want to talk about the fact that he didn't listen exactly to the thing, but the fact that he was so excited about his healing that he had to tell everyone that he could about it. And so that brought me to a thing that I talked about with my dad a while back, and it's a little bit of his loose theology on miracles. And so my dad has personal feelings on miracles and on healings, that a healing doesn't just happen for the sake of happening, and that a miracle doesn't happen just for the sake of it happening. And you may be thinking to yourself, and you're trying to run all the numbers in your head, and you're like, God doesn't heal just to heal? God doesn't just do miracles? Maybe he does. Maybe he will heal someone just for the sole factor of them getting healed. But what I believe is more powerful, and we may be implied to go do, is the next step following the healing or miracle. And that's what this man did. So, no matter the outcome of the prayer, no matter the outcome of the reaching up for a healing, I believe there is a next step. I believe that there is a call to do the next thing after a prayer, whether you feel like it was answered immediately or not. And so I want you to begin to ask yourself in this very moment, and I can't figure out how to put this correctly, so please know there is love in my heart completely when I say this. If you were to receive your healing right now, in this very moment, what would your next breath be? What would your next moment be? Would you still be sitting? Would you be clapping and praising? Would you be running out the doors telling everyone you knew what happened? Would you be putting it on Facebook? What would you do if you got your miracle right now? Would you be spreading it around to everyone that you knew, trying to get them to grasp that there's a God that loves them and wants to heal them because you have personally experienced it? Or would you hold it to yourself? And let's even look vice versa, and this is a tougher part. If you didn't receive your healing right now, if you were to pray for it and you didn't, would you just shrug your shoulders and say, maybe next time, and kind of just go about your day? Would you get bitter? Or would you lean in more to God, saying, God, maybe I didn't receive my healing at this point right now, and that's really tough for me in my own human heart. That's tough to deal with. I prayed for something and I didn't get it. But God, I understand that you are sovereign and that you are working out to bring the best forward out of me and out of those around me. So God, whatever you decide, I am in wholeheartedly, and I am into what you are saying and doing. I want to bring this home with one final excerpt, and that's found in Luke 17, 11 through 19, if the worship band wants to go ahead and come up. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the synopsis of this excerpt, and that is the question, what will you do with your healing? So this story here is Jesus heals 10 men with leprosy. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priests. And they went, and as they went, they were cleansed. I want you to have something to put in your back pocket right here, and that is a little phrase right here. And I think it amounts to a lot of faith that is just way too short to give it justice. And that is here in 14, when it says, when he saw them, he said, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. I want you to have this in your back pocket because I think this is a powerful amount of faith that these 10 people all were not cleansed at the point of them deciding that they were going to go show themselves to the priest and follow what Jesus said. They were just as dirty as they ever were. They were just as rotted and unclean as they ever were. But in this moment, Jesus said, go and show yourselves to the priests. I think it takes a lot of faith that despite your situation, you look down at yourself and nothing's changed, but you feel God calling you and telling you to do something else. And it wasn't until as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except for this foreigner? Then he said to him, rise and go, your faith has made you well. All 10 of those people were cleansed. All 10 of them along the way became whole. But this one that was on his path, that was on his journey, looked down, realizing he was made whole, realizing he was made clean. Because you understand, leprosy isn't just a physical healing, it's a complete life healing. You're no longer an outcast. You're no longer thrown away. You're no longer considered unclean. Your entire life and the trajectory of it was restored in this moment. And yet only one turned around. Now I think of what these leprous people may have been thinking as they were healed. Maybe the 9 or the 90%, they were thinking to themselves, this is great news for me. I can go back. This is just fantastic. I'm going to go see my family again. And then as that one looked down at his hands, he said, this is great news that everyone needs to know. I need more people to know about the God that did this for me. Maybe the other 9 were thinking, I can do what I want now. I can go hang out with my friends. I can go fishing. I can do whatever I want. And that one was thinking, God, whatever you want, I'll do. And lastly, maybe what the 9 were thinking is, I'm just so glad to have my life back. I'm so glad to be able to go back home. I'm so glad to be able to hold my kids and just hug my wife. What a fantastic thing. I'm not slapping on that. That's not what I'm doing. But maybe that one that did return thought to himself instead, I will never be the same. My life will never be the same because I have encountered a God that heals and cares. Now, what I want to challenge you with right now is don't wait for your healing to be the one. And this may take a lot of, maybe this might struggle with your heart, but believe for others to be healed while you're still praying for your own healing. Being healed isn't the permit to suddenly begin to pray for healing for others. Trust in God that He does, in fact, have the power to heal. Recognize His power. Submit to His sovereignty. Maybe you didn't get healed this time. Don't take that as God pushing you to the side. Instead, look at it, okay, God, what can I do with where I am right now to glorify your name and advance your kingdom even where I'm standing right now? Maybe the thing that you see as the thorn in your side is actually the encouragement for someone behind you to know that they can keep going because you are still going. And lastly, be ready for whatever He has to say or do when He does respond.